Okay, well, we're a decent portion into Ephesians chapter 4 at this point, and I'll give you a hint. If you're feeling cold, what you do is you just get really close to your Bible and really focus, and it'll warm you up. And so, as we get into Ephesians 4, we have to remember the first three chapters. And I know I say this every class, but I want you to keep it in mind because God spent three chapters, half this book, setting the stage. And those first three chapters are really designed to do one thing, to get you to think how much the church matters to God. And so now that we're in Ephesians 4, we're getting that application of, since God loves the church so much, what kind of people should we be? What kind of lives should we lead? And we got done dealing with a really awesome thing, which is that God gave gifts to men. Over in down in verse 7, it says, to each one of us grace was given according to the measure of Christ's gift. And he goes on to talk about how within the church you have all sorts of different people with all sorts of different abilities and strengths and weaknesses and so on and so forth. And you put those people together and great things happen. And God designed it to be that way. He designed to have that kind of diversity in the church. And so, as we look through the church, he says He did it to equip us. He put that diversity within the church to give us strength so that we would be equipped, down in verse 12, the saints would be equipped for the work of ministry, for the edifying, that's the building up of the body of Christ, till we all come to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to a perfect man, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. So his point is, he says, I've got this diversity within the church. I've got these different talents and different abilities, different strengths that people have, and I've given it to the church to equip you, and it's going to be that way so that you might have unity. Which is an odd thing to say, because typically when we start talking about people being different, you think, well, isn't that the easiest way to destroy unity? Right? You have a bunch of different people who are not like each other, and that's going to create division. And God says, no, it's not that way. In the church, I've given different gifts, different strengths, and you have something unique to provide. And when each person is providing their unique strengths, you get unity. Because we're now all working together to fulfill that pattern that God has for the church. We're working, and everybody providing their part to really give the church strength. Because you have things that will strengthen the church that I don't have. And so as we all put our strengths together, we find that we are able to be protected against all sorts of different things. You can easily see this just, I guess, in the most basic example is just men and women. Men have strengths and women have strengths. And those are not the same strengths, are they? But you put them together and you begin to see that, hey, a man and a woman, and they're going to raise children and have a life together, and they're a lot better together than they are apart. They're able to do the task of raising those children much better than they would individually. And so in Ephesians 4, he says, that's what I've done. As I've taken the church and I've grabbed people, and they have all these different strengths, and you look at it and you say, oh, I wish I was like so-and-so, or I wish I was like this or that. God says, no, that's not the way I wanted it. I want you to be the best you. And when every one of us tries to be the best us that we can be, the church gets stronger. And then he says down in verse 14 that he did this that we should no longer be children, tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine by the trickery of men and the cunning craftiness of deceitful plotting. And so here he said, I want the church to be strong. I want you to grow up. I want to equip you. Why? Because there are crafty, deceitful men out there. That's really what it comes down to. I don't want any of you to be children because there are men out there that want to destroy what I've created. They want to tear down this wonderful thing, the church that I built through my Son's blood. And in order for you to protect yourselves, I need to make you adults too. That word for children we talked about last week it means minors, not adults yet. So he says, I don't want you to be minors anymore. I want you to be adults. I want you to be strong. I want you to be prepared for the things that are ahead. And so here you have this picture. How much does God want to protect the church? Very, very much so. And He's put each of us here to do that. Each of us has something we can provide to bring unity to the church, to bring growth to the church, to draw us closer to Christ. Remember, that's what he says there in verse 13, that we would come to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, that we would fill out the body. I guess it would be kind of like you have a little scrawny kid, and then you don't see him for 4 or 5 years, and he comes back after doing weightlifting. And what's he done? He's filled out, hadn't he? And so that's what he says. I want you to fill out. So everybody in the church has something they can do to help fill out the body. And so then he says in verse 15, but, now there are false teachers out there. There are people who want to destroy God's work. There are people who want to tear it down. People who want to use religion as a battering ram. People who want to use religion to gain power, to gain money. Of course, you see that all over the world, right? Religion being used and misused in 1,000 different ways. But whenever you see that, now you're going to see the opposite, right? That's what's out there is false teaching and corruption and deceit and trickery and cheating. But speaking the truth in love may grow up in all things into Him who is the head, Christ. God doesn't want us to have that kind of agitation. It is so easy for congregations to have nothing but being tossed to and fro, like verse 14 says. Just agitation, trial, suffering, hurting, pain, confusion. It is a normal thing if you look around at religion to have those things. God says, I don't want you to be normal. I want you to have something other than that. I want you to grow up into all things into Him who is the head, Christ. Now that's an awesome statement. If Christ is the head, and you look at Him as being fully grown, He's the way the body should be. How perfect is Christ? He's the perfect head. And so He says, I want you to enjoy the blessings of having a body that is appropriately fit to its head. It is a body befitting of Christ as its leader, as Christ as its guide. And so here, as we look at ourselves, a congregation here in Monroe, if we were to get a report card, what kind of people are we being? Are we being a body here, a local body of saints that are pleasing to God and befitting the head that we have? That we could say, Christ is our head, and we are, as a congregation, are acting like it. See, that's what He's really going for. Is I want you to grow up and not be agitated and torn away by false teaching and always slipping into problems. I want you to be sturdy, grown up, happy, fulfilled, complete, every muscle working properly. I want you to grow up into that head. And so here, how did God make it so that we could grow up into that head? He took a bunch of different people and He put them together and He said, you use your strengths, and you use your strengths, and you use your strengths, and everybody work, and what happens? We grow up. Now in verse 15, he says, this is how you do it. You take all these different people with the different strengths that they have, and you speak the truth in love. Now it's a funny thing about that speaking the truth, the word speak isn't in there. It just means truthing. That you would be truthing in love. The only problem is truthing isn't a word. And so you have to say it in a way that makes sense. But really if I say speak the truth versus saying I want you to go about your whole life truthing. Is there a difference between those two? One has to do with just what I say. The other one has to do with everything about my life. And that's really what he's saying, is I want you to, in every aspect of your life, be about truth. Uncover lies. Live in sincerity. Be genuine people. Love that which is right. You go over to Philippians, and it'll talk over Philippians 4:8 about dwelling on the things that are pure and holy and righteous and good, of good report. That's truthing. When I take my whole life and I dedicated it to being a genuine, sincere person that fights lies, that lives a truthful way, what comes out of my mouth is what I do, that's truthing. And he says, if the whole church will be about truthing, and you'll be truthing people, what's the other thing? In love. If you will be people who take your various strengths and you put them together with a desire to, in every way, love truth and live it, and then you combine that with a love, just that one word, love. You combine it with a love of God, you combine it with a love of man, you combine it with a love of the brethren, you combine it with a love of the lost, and you put those two things together, what kind of a congregation are you going to get? See, God says over and over again in the Bible that each person has stuff that they're going to be good at, things that they are naturally stronger in. And all of those things become good things when we love the truth and we love the Lord and each other. When we are truthing people and loving people. And so really, if we want to grow up into the head, how do you do it? You just take whoever you are, whatever strengths you have, whatever personality traits you have, and you just say, I'm going to take my personality traits. You say, well, I'm a really stubborn person. Okay, let's make it perseverance. Let's channel it into that, right? I'm a very shy person. Okay, we're going to channel shy into I'm a good listener. Now, we're going to take the things that you naturally are, and we're going to harness them under the banner of truth and love. If everybody does that, what happens to the congregation? Every time. See, we grow up into the head, who is Christ. And so, here's this picture. Don't be agitated anymore. Don't let false teachers drive you here and there. Don't let the world tear you down and smash you like a bug. Instead, truth, love. Take who you are and harness it under truth and love. And then you'll find that you grow. You find that you grow into the kind of people and eventually kind of congregation that the Lord is going to be pleased with. Anybody have any questions on that? Okay, then we move down to verse 16. It says, so we want to grow up in the head, who is Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and knit together by what every joint supplies. Now here you have two words, joined and knit. Now, both of those words mean the same thing, but they kind of mean something different too. It's a picture. When you join something, you just kind of connect it. But then when you knit something, if I'm going to go and weave something together, what's the difference between taking, I don't know, you just take two pieces of string and you tie them together? What's the difference between tying two pieces of string together and weaving a rug? Strength. See, there somebody knows it, right? Strength. It's all about strength. When you knit, it's you connected two things, but how have you done it? As tightly as you possibly can. So that there's no single fiber holding the thing together anymore, is there? Matter of fact, in the Old Testament, Solomon talked about this idea of a threefold cord is not quickly broken. If you have a threefold cord, you tie and build a cord out of multiple strands, it's not about the strength of any individual strand anymore, is it? It's about the whole rope. And so here, you have the body, and it's growing into Christ, and it's joined and knit. It's fastened in the most solid way possible. And how does it do that? How is it joined and knit together? By what every joint supplies. Now, that word joint means band. It means, it's the word you use for connecting two things. And of course, we use it most commonly, you talk about the joint on your body, right? You have joints, so your elbow joint or something like that. What this is literally talking about is the church becomes stronger with every bond created. And really, you think about it in your life as a Christian, how many joints within this congregation do you have? How many bands? How many connections? Junctures. So it's the word they use for a juncture or a nexus. Well, you have any one person. And so you have someone like Rod there. And Rod has a connection with Denise. And so there's a joint there in the church. Now, Rod also has a joint with me in the church. Is it the same joint as what he has with Denise? Not at all. Not even close. And then you have Rod and Roger. And you move over there. Now, Rod and Roger have a connection. But is it the same as the connection Rod and Roger have with me? Or Rod has with me? No. Is it the same as Roger has with me? How many different flavors of joints are there in the church? Just a zillion. See, I'm not nearly as adventurous with food as some people are. You take like Dan back there. Dan will combine any two food products, and they only barely have to pass as food products. But Dan will mix any number of things. Now, every once in a while, now I used to just only give him a hard time, but every once in a while, Dan will come up with some weird combination of things that taste good. But you never know whether it'll taste good until you do what Dan does, which is you try every disgusting combination. But the point is, you begin to take two flavors. You take any one flavor. You take, orange flavor. And you take orange and you combine it with, peanut butter. Or you take orange and you combine it with chocolate. Are those going to be the same flavors? Not close. Every single connection is unique. So here, how does the church become joined and knit together? By what every connection, every other Christian has with every other Christian. When we say, I am going to be involved in the life of the saints, you're going to have a zillion different relationships in the church when you do that. And some are going to be the closest relationships of your life. Like you take Rod and Denise, they're a married couple, and that is about as close a relationship as you could possibly imagine. Some will be that strong, others will not be as close, right? There are people in the church that you know and you love, but you're not super close to, right? It happens. But everyone matters. Because when you go out and you begin to be nice to people and you try and live in the lives of other Christians, do you know which ones, before you say anything or meet the person or do anything, do you know which ones are going to be the big ones in your life? You have no idea. You don't know until you try, just like food, right? You got to try the two together and then you can say, hey, that was a big deal. That's what God says. The whole body is joined and knit together by what every joint supplies. Every single Christian working with every other Christian, that's what happens. The body becomes fused together when every part connects to every other, right? So it's not just about, see, you go over to Corinthians and it talks about each one of us is a body part, right? You have ears and eyes and so on and so forth. Well, it's not just about the foot or the hand or the toe or so on and so forth. It's about the connection between the toe and the foot, or the ear and the side of the head. In other words, every body part matters, but only matters if it connects to the other body parts. And so here, one of the things we're told over and over again in the Bible is you are special, and you have something to give, and you have something to offer. You have something that the Lord wants to use. How do you use it? You start getting involved with other saints. And when you do that, things happen. When you begin to get involved, when you begin to make joints, connections with other people in the Lord's body, then things start to happen. I cannot tell you how many times you will have people and they say, they end up leaving, they say, well, I never felt a part. And you look back and you say, well, I know why you never felt a part. You never tried to be a part. You kept waiting for everybody else to drag you along and make it work. And I'm not saying we shouldn't try and do that, right? If you get somebody and they become a part of the church, we should all step in and try and build relationships with them. But at some point, each of us has to make the decision. I'm going to start making joints. I'm going to start knitting together with other people. And when all of us do that, the whole body, joined and knit together by what every joint supplies, according to the effective working by which every part does its share. So you build those relationships, and everybody does their share. They do what they're good at. They do what they can. What happens? It causes the growth of the body for the edifying of itself in love. So when everybody says, I'm going to be me, and I'm going to harness however I've been designed by God, I'm going to harness it to serve Him. And then everybody says, I'm going to harness it to serve Him, and I'm going to speak the truth in love, and I'm going to begin to be involved in other people's lives. And I'm going to give my 100%. Then the body grows. See, this is the exact opposite of what you see in the religious world as a whole. What you see so much of the time is, well, here's a church, and you write a check, and we've got people to do that stuff for you. You write the check, and the pastor will take care of this, or the youth pastor will take care of that, or we'll write a check and we'll send it off, and we've got this missionary fund over here, and they'll take care of the whole thing. And it really, your job is to show up, fill a pew, and then when the bucket gets passed, you put money in. And we're really taught a lot of the time that that's what religion is you show up and there are people for that. So much so that in many more of what they'd call the Orthodox churches, they will separate the two and they'll say there's clergy and there's laity. Now, laity means the common person. So if laity is the common person, what does that by default make the clergy? Oh, they're the special folks. Leave it to the special folks. You just put your money in. That's not what you see in your Bible, is it? Every one of us has something to give. Every one of us has an effective work to do, a part to share in. And when every one of us does that, the body grows. And the added benefit to that is if everybody's working and then all of a sudden somebody has to move because of their job, or somebody dies, or somebody gets sick, or their life changes in some way so they can't do the things they were doing before, what happens? What happens if one strand breaks in a woven rug? You still got a rug, don't you? And so really what happens is by doing it God's way, we become strong in a way that isn't dependent on any one individual anymore. We can feel confident that the Lord's work will be done here in Monroe because every part's doing its share. So if I kicked off tomorrow, hey, no problem. It'll work out. Every part's doing its share. We're joined and we're knit together. It's not all dependent on me. I just have to be the best me, and everybody else will be the best them, and the Lord's work will get done. What an awesome thing. That you don't have to worry about having the weight of the world on your shoulders anymore. You just have to be you. and do what you can with what you got and start where you are and work that way, and the body will grow. And not only will it grow, but what kind of growth do we have? That word keeps showing up. The body will grow in love. Not only will we grow, but we get to enjoy the journey. It's going to be a happy thing, this growth. Anybody have any questions? Okay. So then we move down to verse 17. And he says, "This I say therefore, and testify in the Lord, that you should no longer walk." Okay, so what we're doing now, we're going to switch gears for a second. We have been saying, this is what you should do. This is how you should live. But now we're going to switch back and talk about, now this is how you shouldn't live. Now this isn't the first time that this has happened. Remember earlier in the book, when Paul was talking about how great it is to be a Christian, one way he talked about it was saying, remember when you weren't? Remember all the things that you had wrong? Remember all the problems you had? One way to talk about the type of person you should be is by looking and saying, well, that's the kind of person I don't want to be. And so that's what he's going to do here. We should work together. We should join our lives together, knit together, growth, working of every part, doing its share. Don't be like the rest of the Gentiles walk, in the futility of their mind. That is in just the folly of it. It's just guessing all the time. I think I should do this, or I think I should do that, and there's no plan, there's no system. He says they do it having their understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of God. Now what do we have? We're growing up into what? The head, Christ. The body's growing, it's growing in love, it's growing into the fullness of the stature of Christ, it's growing up towards that head. The opposite is you're alienated from the life of God. There is no growth. There is no happiness. There is no plan and future and hope. He says, they do this, they walk in that futility, their understandings are darkened, they're alienated from God because, and he's going to list two things, the ignorance that is in them and the blindness of their heart. Now there are two reasons why people aren't Christians. And you just mark it down, it is always one of these two. Somebody is not a Christian because either A, they're ignorant, which simply means they don't know. Not knowing. Ignorance is just a matter of saying, I don't know. If somebody asked you right now, they said, what's the name of the guy? And they pointed to a house down the street. You just say, I don't know. I'm ignorant. I don't know. Either they aren't Christians because they're ignorant, or because the blindness, and some verses say hardness of their hearts. People aren't Christians because either A, they don't know any better, or B, they have chosen to not know any better. They've hardened their heart. It's always one of the two. And really, of those two, a hardened heart or an ignorant heart, which one can you fix? You can do something about the ignorance, right? If I asked you, who lives down the street in that house, you'd say, I don't know, I'm ignorant. Could you fix that? Walk up to the house, knock on the door, and say, who are you? And you could fix the ignorance. But if you're hardened, if you say, I don't want to know, I can't do anything for you. And so here, Paul is describing people don't grow because either they have a lack of knowledge, which can be fixed, or they have a hardened heart, which you really can't fix. They're blind. They've closed their eyes, said, I don't want to look. I don't want to know. Now that happens a lot. We see where you begin to talk to people about Bible verses and they get upset or they get angry, which is understandable. I look at a lot of Bible verses that upset me, step on my toes. But if somebody says, oh, I don't like that verse, and they walk away and never come back, what does that tell you about their heart? They hardened it. They said, I had a choice to either accept the truth and change or not, and I can't handle the truth. And so that kind of person you can't do anything about. But the ignorant person you can. And so when we go out and live our lives, that's who you're looking for. You're looking for the ignorant person. You're looking for the person who just doesn't know any better. If you can teach the truth to somebody who just doesn't know it, but has a soft heart, they will obey the gospel every time. Because a soft, humble heart, when confronted with the truth, will obey the truth. And so here he says, don't be like those people who are out there and now they're ignorant and they're hardened hearts. And then he goes on to talk more about those who are hardened in their heart. In verse 19 he says, who being past feeling. Now those people who are blind in their heart, they are past feeling. That's the word for callous. You know where you build up a callus on something? If you've been working with a shovel for a long, long time and so it rubs on your hand at just that one spot over and over again, you'll build up a callus from repetitive motion, repetitive friction. That's what a callus is. And when you build the callus up enough, you don't feel the pain anymore. So that's why you can see guys who dig ditches for a living, you go, boy, my hands just really hurt, and theirs don't. Well, they've got calluses there that you don't have from that repeated activity that built those calluses up. There are people who can't hear the truth. You ever wonder why it is that you can take, I've done this before with preachers. I mean, guys out in the religious world, you go and you turn over, you say, let's look over at Mark 16:16. So I'm going to look at Mark 16:16. It says, he who believes and is baptized will be saved. So you turn to them and you say, do you need to believe and be baptized to be saved? I've done this. And you know what's amazing to me? You can read the verse, say, he who believes and is baptized will be saved. And then you turn back to them and you say, do you think that you have to believe and be baptized to be saved? And you know what they'll say? No. How do you get to that point where you cannot see something as plain as that? Callous. You built callous up. You taught yourself for a long, long time a certain thing, and you build a callus up in your brain so where you just can't see it anymore. And this happens. And so here you have people in the world, and he says, now, what's the point of pointing all of this stuff out? I don't want you to do this. I don't want you to be ignorant anymore. So how do you remove ignorance? You look for the truth. You learn. You study. You find out the answers. It says, I don't want you to be people with blind hearts, with hardened hearts. So you always keep your heart soft. You always look yourself in the mirror and say, I have things to work on. I have things to grow in. I'm not perfect. I've got errors to correct. God knows better than I do. And then he says, don't be past feeling. Don't ever get to that point where you've calloused your mind. Don't get to the point where you've got a mind that is unwilling to hear a different point of view because you've calloused it. Now, we just got done talking about we shouldn't be tossed to and fro and carried about by every wind of doctrine. God doesn't want you to be somebody who just, every time somebody has a new idea, you just go, ooh, and just jump with it, and then the next time, ooh, and jump over this way. But that doesn't mean you can't have an honest, open mind, right? You want to keep your mind open, just not so open that the wind blows through it. And so, as you look at it, that's what he's saying. I don't want you to be calloused people. I want you to have that mind that is willing to accept truth from wherever it comes from. That is willing to look at human beings and still have a caring heart about them. So that you don't look at somebody else and say, oh, I don't want to study with them, or I don't want to talk to them. And we begin to make judgments about other human beings and not giving them a chance to hear the truth. He says, there are people who, being past feeling, have given themselves over to lewdness, to work all uncleanness with greediness. What happens when you callous your mind? Well, then you don't feel it when you do the wrong thing. New Testament has another way of saying it, which is you sear your conscience. You can get to a point where if you do the wrong thing enough times, you will sear your conscience and it won't bother you anymore. And he says, don't be that way. Don't be callous. Don't have a seared conscience, because when you do that, you'll jump headlong into sin and it'll wreck your life. And so, you look at this. Now, why is God telling us all these things? What did He say in the first 3 chapters? I love you. God's telling us these things because He loves us. Because He doesn't want you to learn things the hard way. He doesn't want us to have to suffer and deal with the consequences of sin. And He certainly doesn't want you to get so hardened by sin, so calloused, that you lose out on salvation altogether. And so here, down in verse 19, He says they've given themselves over to work all uncleanness with greediness. Verse 20, but you have not so learned Christ. What did Christ teach you? Don't get calloused. Don't ever think you've got all the answers. Have an open mind. Don't ever accept that you know enough. Search out for the truth. Don't be ignorant. Don't have a hard heart. Don't let sin entrap you. Don't walk in the futility of your mind, just making it up as you go. Find the answers. Do it God's way. That's what we learn from Christ. You think about Christ came along, and when He walked this earth, what did He say over and over and over again? Follow me. He kept telling that to all those different disciples, didn't He? Come follow me. Let me be the guide. He calls us His sheep, and He's the shepherd. What we've learned in Christ is instead of do it your own way, figure it out yourself, is there is somebody who knows how to guide us. There's a God who loves us. There's a God who's our shepherd. There's a God that wants you to listen to His voice and come, because He doesn't want you out in the cold and the wet and the rain. He wants to keep you safe. And so, really, it's a beautiful picture we get here in Ephesians 4 of what an awesome God that loves us so much that He tells us all the pitfalls of human beings. You're going to find times you're tempted to do this, times you're tempted to do that. Don't do it, because I want better for you. I love you. Anybody have any comments or questions? Okay, then we move on down in verse 20. It says, you've not so learned Christ, if indeed you have heard Him and have been taught by Him, as the truth is in Jesus. So there's another answer to all the things that the world tells us. How do you become a Christian? How do you learn of Christ? How do you become one of Christ? Paul says, you heard Him, and you were taught by Him, and the truth is in Him. When we study the Word, when we listen to it, when we take its teachings and apply it, then we've learned Christ. He says that you put off concerning your former conduct the old man which grows corrupt according to deceitful lusts. So here now we have another picture. Now we're going to talk about 2 men. You have an old man and you have a new man. Now the old man, over in Romans chapter 6, Paul talks about baptism, and he says when you're baptized, you're buried. And what happens to you when you're buried in that water? Something happens. All your sins are crucified on that cross with Christ. They're nailed to that cross. You die. So you die, and you come up out of the water a new man. So there's really 2 of you. The moment you become a Christian, now you say, well, I've got 2 of me. I've got the old me and the new me. We often say things like you have a clean slate, a fresh start, a new life. So here he says, put off concerning your former conduct the old man, that man that you were before you were baptized, that man you were before you obeyed Christ, that old man which grows corrupt according to deceitful lusts. Before you were a Christian, the life that you chose, the lifestyle outside of Christ, is one that gets worse and worse and worse. If we follow the path of let's do everything but obey Christ, what's going to happen to your life? It's going to get worse. Now, it may get worse really, really fast, or it may get worse kind of slowly, bit by bit. That just depends on how fast you're walking. But if you're walking away from Christ or running away from Christ, you're going to grow in all the ways you don't want to grow. You're going to grow corrupt. And he says, so put off that man. That old man will never get better. He is a decaying man. He is a man full of the stench of sin. You think about that imagery that the Bible gives us of when we come to Christ, we are washed of our sins. It's like it's sins of dirt. It's like it's a filth. It says that old man, he's covered in that filth. So don't go back to him because he's corrupted. Put that man off and be renewed in the spirit of your mind. Let your life begin to take a new course, that you put on the new man which was created according to God in true righteousness and holiness. And when you decided to become a Christian, you made a decision up here. There was a spirit, a disposition, an attitude in your mind when you became a Christian. And that was one of, I don't want that life anymore. I want Christ. I want heaven. I want hope. He says, listen to that voice. Listen to that attitude and make your new life according to God. A life in righteousness and a life in holiness. And so here we look, and he's going to begin to lay out and say, here is the old man, and what kind of person was he? Corrupted. And you'll never know how corrupt that old man could have gotten. You ever think about that? What kind of person would you have turned in if you never became a Christian? If at that moment where you heard the gospel and obeyed it, what if you'd taken a different course? And you'd said, no, I don't want it. And you'd harden your heart like we just talked about. What would have happened to your life 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road? So they say, put off that man. That man will not take you places you want to go, but listen to that spirit in your mind. That attitude of, I want to do what's right, and then let that attitude guide your life. And so here, starting down about verse 25, we're going to begin to look at what things are the right lifestyle. What kind of choices do the new man make? If we want to be people who are that new man who's put the old one off, what kind of decisions do we make? What kind of lifestyle should we lead? We'll pick up there in verse 25 next week. Anybody have any comments or questions? Okay, we'll shut down there.